Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. We have yet another interview to look at. They've done a lot of post-release interviews. Seems like we get some every couple of days or so from a different news outlet. Not all of them are worth talking about, and even the ones that are worth talking about, usually the entire interview isn't worth reading. A lot of repeated answers, and it's kind of the same thing here. What we have today, even though the interview itself is actually a couple of days old, is an interview with IGN, Naoki Yamaguchi, Yoshinori Kitase, and Kazushige Nojima. Some of the takeaways from this interview are them talking about like Hell House and why he wasn't a random encounter in the remake like he was in the original, and why he became like a boss fight. And then of course probably the title of this video is about Red 13 actually never being playable. He was never conceptualized to be a playable character for the first game. So let's just hop right into it. Of course, IGN asks, what would you say to fans who are hoping for a more straightforward remake of the original game, when it actually seems to be more of a reimagining of sorts instead? Kitase replies with, we, the development team, our fans, and the state of the world have continued to change over the past 23 years. While the world is undergoing dramatic changes, we thought that remaking the game based only on the same merits as 23 years ago may evoke nostalgia, but would never deliver on the element of surprise that is innate to Final Fantasy. I believe people will be able to welcome this project with the same rush of excitement felt back in the days of the original game. So sort of a question and an answer we've looked at in the past, but worded kind of differently, where he talks about the game would lack surprise if they were to just remake the original game, which I've said in the past, and I'll always stand by it. I would have bought that game. If they remade the original game just where it looks like remake, I still would have probably bought that for $60. But the statement he says is very true. For those of us that played the original game, there'd be no surprises. We'd be playing the exact same game again, 100% every step of the way. We'd know what's going to happen. The only people that'd be surprised by anything would be the ones that never played the original at all. So that's part of why I've said in the past multiple times I love the remake. I love not knowing what to expect. So IGN says, Cloud in the remake seems like a much deeper character, and his arc is more motivated and interesting than in the original. How did the team decide where and how to add new dimensions and layers to these characters? Were there characters that were harder to write than others? Nojima replies with, as the physical depiction of characters has gotten far more realistic, there was a need to make their inner depiction with a similar sense of realism. First and foremost, there were personalities that I had imagined these characters having back when creating the original, so I wrote the scenario this time by recollecting those memories. It wasn't so much depicting a new side, but rather just now bringing out a side to them that existed back then, but wasn't fully portrayed at the time. Of course, I don't remember everything, so there are parts that I newly created this time around as well. By adding new expressive elements such as voiceovers, action movements, and facial expressions, each with their own additional layers of passion and interpretation of the members who handled them, we're able to ultimately create these remake characters. So the main reason I wanted to read that part is that a lot of people think that the characters in Remake are kind of newer versions or different versions than they were in the original, when Nojima, who's the scenario writer for both the original FF7 and, of course, the Remake, is saying, not really, though. They're pretty much the exact same characters. We just couldn't really portray them that well in the original FF7, obviously being text-based. But with the current technology, of course, you get a better look at how these characters have actually always been, how their personalities have always been. Though he does admit to not remembering everything, of course. It's been 23 years, so there are some new aspects to these characters. Also, part of why I believe people think that Cloud is different in the remake versus how we've heard him and seen him in the past is because of Steve Burton's interpretation of the character, which I don't hate it, because that's the Cloud I've known for most of my life. But his line deliveries are honestly kind of monotone, whereas Cody Christian gives Cloud a lot more personality. I think he's a way better voice actor, in my opinion. Speaking of which, they actually ask about replacing the English cast, to which Kitase replies with, the original game obviously never had a voice cast. We began using actors for the characters starting with the second work in the compilation, the sequel movie Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. For the film, the characters were already older than in the original game, and 15 years have passed since then. We continued to work with the same voice actors over numerous projects. However, since this title is set in an era that precedes Advent Children with a younger cast, we wanted to discover a new generation of voice actors that would be suitable for expressing younger versions of the characters. While expressing our utmost respect to the Advent Children cast, I look forward to the future success of the new cast. So a question and answer we've received in the past, but worded kind of differently. But I know people that are set in their ways. The people that love the old voice cast and are still upset by the new cast will never change their mind, and that's fine. The only one that I agree with really a lot is George Newbern. I love his depiction of Sephiroth. He's the main one that if I had to have one of them back, it'd probably be him. But I do think Tyler Hoechlin's doing a good job. But I don't mind the new cast at all. I think they're doing a fantastic job. So IGN goes on to say, upon seeing Hell House, Aerith and Cloud seemed shocked. How do we fight a house? How early into development did someone on the team ask that question? Hamaguchi replies with, let's see, it's a fact that we were challenged quite a bit with Hell House. Many of the enemies featured in the original FF7 are iconic, but with the graphics becoming more realistic, it was a challenge to think of convincing reasons why these enemies would have come to exist within this world. In the original game, Hell House was an enemy that could be randomly encountered near Wall Market, but we determined that no matter how we approached it, we simply could not think of a setting in which it would be natural to find it wandering the slums in Remake. So it was decided from the early stages of development that we would give Hell House a special portrayal as a boss in Wall Market. So I thought this was interesting for a few reasons, because it's actually something I talked about over a year ago. We were doing a set of videos where we talked about enemies that might not make it into the remake. Luckily, when it came to those videos, I was wrong, because it seems like they're not shying away from any of the enemies from the original game, but one of the ones we talked about was Hell House, and the reason I gave in that video was kind of similar to Hamaguchi's reply. I talked about how it really wouldn't make a lot of sense. He doesn't blend in Sector 6 at all. It doesn't even remotely look like anything in Sector 6. There's no houses that even resemble him. There's not even any houses in Sector 6. It's just destruction. So it's kind of interesting to see this answer all this time later from Hamaguchi, where they came to sort of the same conclusion. There just wasn't a way to put him out there as a random enemy roaming the world, so they made him into a boss fight in the Colosseum instead. And lastly, of course, we have our boy Red 13. IGN asks, was there ever a point where Red 13 was playable? Why or why not? Hamaguchi replies with, no, we felt that many players familiar with the original would want to control the character, but as he appears towards the end of this game, we were careful about disruptions to the overall tempo that may occur by treating him in the same manner as the other main characters who appear earlier. We also felt for new players, it may seem odd to have control over a new character so late into this game, and we couldn't introduce him earlier. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a multi-game project. As such, I believe there will be opportunities to control Red 13 in the future, so it'd be great if Red 13 fans can look forward to this. So this is something we talked a lot about. Like earlier this year, I'm pretty sure late last year as well, we talked a lot about Red 13 and whether or not he would or wouldn't be playable, whether or not he would be in the game at all. I was pretty adamant about that. A lot of people wanted to disagree with me. They swore he'd be a playable character. Most RPGs out there, you get all your characters, up to a certain point in the game, maybe halfway, a little past halfway, whatever the case. Most RPGs, maybe there are some out there, you won't get a character at pretty much the end of the game. That doesn't really give you time to learn the character, to level up the character. In this game's case, there wouldn't even really be any time to get him other weapons, to learn more abilities with the ability tree for the weapons. It just wouldn't make any sense to put him at the end of the game as a playable character. What we actually talked a lot about in the past was if they could introduce him earlier in the game in the story, or if there's a lot of stuff to do after the Shinder building, then maybe he'd be playable. But as we know, of course, with the remake, that wasn't the case. But I thought that was interesting to look at and talk about because, according to Hamaguchi, since they knew that the first game was going to be Midgar only, there was never a time that Red 13 was ever going to be playable. Speaking of Red 13, somebody left a comment in our last video where we talked about Cosmo Canyon. What do you think Red 13's triangle ability is going to be? The thing is, it's kind of hard to speculate because when it came to the original game, the only thing that made characters unique from the other characters, besides their weapons, was their limit breaks. That's the only unique attacks that they had at all, so that's really the only thing to base this off of. Just thinking that one of his limit breaks would probably be his triangle ability. By the way, my dudes, that is the video. Of course, I want to pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on Red 13 never being playable? What are your thoughts on Hell House? Do you like the way they depicted Hell House in the remake? Because I personally do. That's a hell of a boss fight. It's probably the hardest boss fight experience in the game, even on normal. I still haven't got around to fighting him on hard yet, and I'm not really looking forward to it. By the way, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to stay updated with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @DashingDavid, at my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain or leave it like Cobain.